Okay, I'm going to be talking tonight about the Senate races in Florida, Louisiana, and Texas. Let's start with Florida. Ashley Moody. Any recent polls about Hello. Let me close this door here. Uh, well, welcome to Thursday. We're having we're going to be having a discussion now. Let me get this squared away here a little bit. Okay, we're going to be talking a little bit more about we're going to be talking about the Florida race, the Louisiana race, Texas race. But first, I want to talk about China because there's been some discussion about China and potential for war in the South China Sea and all that. First, let's kind of review that a little bit. Why does China want that area? Why does they want the South China Sea? Why are they claiming sovereignty? They're not claiming. Remember, the Chinese are not claiming mineral rights or exclusive economic rights like the Philippines or Vietnam are given. By the way, exclusive economic zone rights are given by the United Nations. They're identified. That's identified by the United Nations, and it's a right given to them, not a claim that they take. Okay, that's a difference. China is claiming sovereignty the way the way Trump claimed sovereignty over the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, very similar dynamic there. The what China's doing is it really is consistent with what China has done over centuries. In centuries past, the way China would dominate its neighbors is it wouldn't conquer them usually, or very often. What it would do, it would develop what we in the West call the vassal state relationship. In other words, a state this went on for 800 years or so. You had the Chosun Empire, the Chosun Korean Empire, and they would be subservient to China. They would actually, send their gifts, their emissaries there with gifts, and they would literally do a kowtow. That was a formal way of admitting subservience and submission, and China would do that. That was typical, and they would do it with other nations, the Muslim nations to the farther to the west, and before they were conquered by them by the Manchus in Manchuria, this is what China would do, and so it looks to do that again. That's how I see it, because if China gets control over the South China Sea, full total sovereign control, just as if the South China Sea was the same as Hong Kong Harbor, then it would have a stranglehold over the trade relations of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and greatly impact even places like Indonesia, and maybe even Singapore, and Malaysia. But definitely the ones I mentioned, the first ones I mentioned. And that would give it the ability to basically force Japan and the Philippines into a subservient, subordinate relationship. And that's what I think the whole thing is all about. And this is where Taiwan comes in, because I think Taiwan, if China was able to take Taiwan, that would give them a stronger claim and a stronger position over the South China Sea. At least that's how I think they perceive it. In reality, would that really mean much? I don't know. Technology is a lot different now. Look at how perceptions of what we all thought was going to be the situation in the Black Sea with Crimea and Ukraine. That didn't work out like we thought. Traditionally, if Russia controlled Crimea, they did basically controlled the entire northern Black Sea. And especially since if you got the navy to do it, but Ukraine and the technology of today changed the script. Now Ukraine has shown us that you don't need a navy to impose a blockade. All you need is missiles nearby, and maybe some sea drones. That helps too. It's the technology of today is really changing how we look upon certain aspects of warfare, like a blockade. Like one of the issues that some people put forth is like, well, China could start taking over Taiwan by having a blockade. Of course, when they say that, they're not really realizing that a blockade itself is an act of war, and therefore the Taiwanese can respond in a warlike fashion if they want to. But it doesn't really matter because the Taiwanese, with missiles, can impose a blockade on China just with missiles. They don't need a navy. All they need are missiles to tell the oil tankers, hey, don't go to Hong Kong. You go to Hong Kong, we're going to sink you. Well, that's a possibility. But that changes things. That means that you don't really need a navy. All you need is missiles if you're there already, to impose a blockade. And that's interesting because ships are expensive. Missiles, although they're costly too, they're not nearly as expensive as ships. And the operation of ships, just the manpower. When you have a ship run by 200, 300 people, 400 people, those salaries add up. Anyway, so I see China taking over Taiwan or having a war. I would. If they do start it, and they might, because the leadership of China does not seem to be acting in a very self-aware, knowledgeable way. They don't really seem to understand what their position really is in this world. They think they have a lot more power than they have. Of course, that gives me a good segue to Trump because he's also a guy that has a lot less power than he thinks he has. And he thinks he's real powerful, but yet, like he's been trying to impose all kinds of restrictions on China, on Canada, and Canada's been running rings around him. Unfortunately, what that means is that we Americans are getting hit hard. Canada's not, they're doing a good job for themselves. They're hitting America bad, and just ask the people in Kentucky, because they're not selling their booze to Canada anymore, and some of the distilleries are having a hard time. Anyway, let's go into the next thing is the Ashley Moody, Cassidy race in Louisiana and the Cronin race in Texas. Let's talk about those three races a bit. My view on those races is a bit different than Silver's and Cook's and Let's Talk Elections. What really changed my mind on Florida was the Miami race, the Miami mayoral race last December. That is when a Democrat won by like 20, 25 points, which alone was amazing because Miami's a weird little city because when you look around the United States, most cities are run by the Democrats. You know, I'm not exactly sure why that's so universal, but it does seem to be the case. So even in places like Indiana, which is a red state, Indianapolis, run by Democrats. And same thing in places like Kansas. Kansas City, Missouri is run by Democrats. Des Moines, Iowa, Des Moines run by Democrats. You can go around the country and you can see that pattern being fairly consistent. But in Florida, it's different. For the past 30 years, Miami's been a solid Republican city. Now, why is that? Why was that? Well, major reason was because of the Cuban Americans. The Cuban Americans, unlike other Hispanic groups, were staunchly Republican. And they were staunchly Republican primarily because, as I understand it, because back in the early 60s, when John F. Kennedy decided not to follow through with the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was probably a good decision, but the Cuban Americans were really pissed off at that. They saw that as their chance to kick Castro out and to go back home. And it didn't happen, so they end up being stuck here. And so they were pissed at John F. Kennedy and therefore at the Democrats. And with that, they then moved on to being Republican. And they've been staunchly Republican. They've been very loyal Republicans. I'll give that for them. They're very, very loyal people. Obviously, they don't change minds or their course very, very easily or quickly or whimsically. But what's happened? Trump comes into power, early last year, and he does his thing with immigration, all that. But that ends up getting targeting the Cuban Americans. And there was a specific person. His name was Isidro Perez, and he was arrested and he was taken to detention. And he was 75 years old, and he's been here since 1965. A good, loyal American, well respected, well loved in the Cuban American community. And he ends up dying. Now, in politics, there are facts and there are perceptions. So the question is, was he killed by the ice? Don't know. I think he had a heart condition or something like that. And, but did ICE not give him his medication? Did ICE not prevent him from having medication? All these detailed facts in the long run really don't matter that much. Because the Cuban Americans are pissed and they feel like they've been targeted. They feel like they've been betrayed. They thought they had a special relationship with the Republican Party, with DeSantis and everybody in the Republican Party in Florida. They thought they were in a special position, and it turns out they weren't. And they're suffering along with other Hispanics around, in Florida and around the country, because this administration is targeting all of them, not just the Mexicans, not just the ones who were convicted or committed crimes. They're just targeting everybody, and they're even now targeting American citizens. Like Renee Nicole Good, who was murdered up in Minneapolis. She was white, mother, was 37 years old, living in a suburban-like setting, and she would have been a typical Republican 10, 15, 20 years ago. And now she's dead. Alex Preddy, who was executed in Minneapolis. You look at pictures of him. He looks like a white guy in his mid-30s, and looked like a guy. He looked similar to guys I knew that did rock climbing. I don't know if he did, but he surely looks like one, like he might have been one. And he couldn't look more American more traditional Caucasian, European descended American than those two, and yet they ended up dead. So this idea that ICE is only going after the Hispanics and Latinos and all that is like, no. That maybe that's what maybe that's how it started. That's how now it's ending up. But anyway, the Cuban Americans, I believe, have really switched their vote because with Miami, that went from a city that normally voted 60-40 or more to the Republicans. It went 60-40 to the Democrats. It was like a 40-50 point swing to the Democrats. That's huge. And I think that extrapolates to much of the rest of the state. I think that people from all walks of life are now getting very upset and and many are getting very angry with what's going on with Trump and ICE and the Republican Party. Plus the fact Florida has other things going on with it. The snowbirds from Canada, they're not coming down, and they spend a lot of money in Texas. It's not, it takes 5 to 10 domestic tourists to take the place of a Canadian tourist. Canadian tourists, when they come down here, they spend a lot of money. And so Florida's really hurting on that ground as well. And then Trump is denying, or not denying, that's not the right word. He is impeding people coming in from other countries to go to the Olympics, the FIFA World Cup, because he's got that $250 additional fee. He's got and probably more importantly, he has the visa applications taking over a year. So anybody who's buying anybody who wants to buy a FIFA World Cup ticket now outside the country, they're not coming here. So, we're probably going to see a lot of empty seats in a lot of the venues around the country because people who wanted tickets couldn't get in, and people who had them couldn't get in. So, too bad. But that's going to impact the vote in Florida. So I see Ashley Moody losing in Florida. I think that's highly likely. I think her odds of her winning are less than 50-50. And odds of her being beaten is, I don't know, probably something like 3-1 or more. I don't think she has a very good chance of winning at all. Now let's look at Louisiana. Now Louisiana is real interesting. That should be a solid red state. That should be a gimme. But there, the Republicans in Louisiana, they screwed up all on their own. Because what they did, because the way Cassidy got in before, is Cassidy was a kind of a moderate Republican, and he was moderate because he had to be. Because they had in Louisiana what's called an open primary, which means that anybody, a Democrat, an independent, not just Republicans, can go in and vote in the Republican primary. So anybody who is really right wing would not get nominated. But that changed because in the last year they changed it from an open primary system to a closed primary system. In a closed primary system, what happens there is only Republicans can vote in the Republican primary. Only Democrats can vote in the Democratic primary. Independents, you can get screwed. You're not voting at all. Bye-bye. So that's a problem. That's a big problem. Because now what happens is the Republican primary comes around and a right-wing Trump-endorsed candidate will almost certainly beat Cassidy. Almost certainly. And so now the election comes around in November, and now it's going to be a Democrat against this very, very far right-wing Trump-endorsed MAGA candidate. That candidate's not likely to win. Because right now, independents are breaking 70-30, 80-20 towards the Democrats. And, another way to look at that, if you look around the country, in any election, you basically have three groups of people. You have the Democrats, the Republicans, and the independents. And only in a few places are there so many Democrats where the Democrats alone can determine victory, or so many Republicans where the Republicans alone can determine victory. Most places in the country, there's less than half the people who are Republicans, less than half the people who are Democrats, and the middle ground is the independents, and they're typically 10, 15, 20, 30% of the population. And the larger that independent group, the more they can impact that election. Now let's look at Louisiana. Louisiana, independents are about 25% of the population. Well, that means that, if they break 70-30 towards the Democrats, Republicans haven't having a chance. And that's why I think that that's why I foresee Louisiana being an easy pickup for the Democrats. Very easy. Now let's look at Texas for a moment. Now, Texas is real interesting. People have been looking at Texas for a long time now, and hoping that it might go blue this year. And they hoped that back in I think it was 2018. They hoped for it in 2020. Every Senate cycle there's a hope that the senators finally going to go this. It's going to go Republican, go blue, go Democrat, and never happens. But each time there's an election for the past 30 years or so, it gets closer and closer. Go back 30 years, it was, the Republicans won by 15 points or more. Then, now it's down like less than 5 last time. But this time around, things have really changed because of Trump. According to the YouGov poll, YouGov Economist poll. By the way, that poll called for Trump's victory called Trump's victory last year. So they're not one way or the other. They'll accept Republican. Excuse me, I gotta let my cat out. He knows there's food out there. Okay. Let's see, where was I? Anyway, in that poll, which was put out just last week, they had Trump's favorability at a negative 17-something percent. And the negativity of Trump in Minneapolis or Minnesota was like 22%. A little bit more than Texas, but I was really surprised at how unpopular Trump was in Texas. And that being the case, I then don't see how considering how Republicans now have become identified with Trump. The entire Republican Party is identified with Trump. Many view it as no longer as the Republican Party, but as Trump's party. Basically, it's Trump's party, and everybody that's in it is follows the line, and kowtow to the leader. Oh crap! Okay, I was not record. I was not. I had my mic off. I didn't realize that the X was on it. Oh crap. Oh, okay. I'm going to end this and start over. I'm going to end this and then I'm going to start over so I don't have to. It'll say